When I was in my early 20s, I was still labouring under the illusion or delusion that the so-called rewarding jobs in our society are actually going to be rewarding. And during this time, I worked as a mental health support worker in Littlemore, in a forensic mental health centre. A nice word for a mental asylum, and I worked with dangerous women who had histories of violence. Now, the diagnostic criteria of those who were dwelling in this 15-bed unit were 70% schizophrenia and 30% borderline personality disorder. Now, anyone who knows anything about mental health will immediately recognize that mixing those two categories of patient is at best a foolish thing to do, and at worst a deliberately sadistic and messed up thing to do, because borderline personality disorder as a diagnosis often implies, let's say, difficult interpersonal behaviours towards other people that are manipulative, threatening, or otherwise unpleasant. And those human beings diagnosed with schizophrenia are often susceptible to both paranoia and extreme sensitivity to the way in which other people are treating them. I have to say it was not rewarding at all. In fact, it put me off working in mental health completely, working in a forensic setting like that. I essentially, by the end of it, felt very much like a kind of concentration camp guard. Certainly not someone who was helping people get better at all. Actually, really just a part of the problem in a number of ways. I saw a lot of incredibly disturbing things unfold there. And I'm deeply, deeply sceptical about psychiatry and the way that it approaches mental health as a result of my time there. A few other things I learnt, I suppose, how best to approach this year. For one, some of the people there were really not pleasant individuals. But when you look at the file on that individual, you see that they really all had incredibly difficult childhoods, some of them subject to unimaginable abuse. And so I suppose this teaches us, or can teach us, or point to this general idea that when we find people to be frankly evil or unpleasant or really nasty, often there is real trauma behind that. It's, in a way, not their fault. Now, I know that determinism and free will and the role of those concepts in moral responsibility is still debated, but I do think that it's somewhat callous if we disregard determinism completely and say, oh, they can just choose to be nice people and this kind of thing. It conveys a lack of understanding, a lack of empathy, and a lack of compassion. So I think one thing I learnt from that is how often the people that we dislike are themselves a part of a process of victimization and abuse that they simply haven't recovered from or can't recover from. The thing is, people don't understand about that place and so-called mental hospitals is they are like hidden worlds. They are hidden worlds hidden away from the mainstream. What goes on there is not something that journalists can access and report on, is often very much abusive in terms of what's going on with the patients. Even though the people working there may have had the best will in the world, Littlemore Mental Health Facility was very much an example of the road to hell being paved with good intentions. The people I worked with were not very critically minded or questioning of the job they were doing and the way that they related to patients and the way in which the diagnosis of the patient impacted the way that they were treating the patient. And I saw some pretty messed up things go down. One particular incident really marked the event where I decided I was going to quit and no longer be a part of any of that. There was a woman there who, let's call her Sarah for the sake of anonymity, it's not her real name. She was diagnosed with schizophrenia, and she wasn't that crazy. I mean, she had her ups and downs. She said some strange things and had some strange ideas and was somewhat paranoid. But she wasn't that crazy. I mean, and the medication that these people are expected to take has such horrific side effects that no sane person would consent to take them. And if a patient refuses to take them, they don't have the human right to refuse treatment like everyone else. That is a part of what it means to be sectioned, is that these people lose their right to refuse treatment. And when they do refuse treatment, the psychiatrist has to get a second opinion. But this is just a pointless policy because all the psychiatrists know each other. They just call one another up and yeah, so go ahead with it. And I think this fundamentally is pretty messed up because we know that so many mental health problems are caused by experiences of powerlessness and experiences of violation, of bodily violation or boundary violation. And to force someone to take a medication that isn't particularly effective, that has terrible, terrible side effects, that breeds dependency and further disempowers that individual ultimately against their will is a messed up thing to do. And on this one occasion, this woman, who we're calling Sarah, was refusing to take her medication, and what I saw unfold before me was just one of the most messed up things I've ever seen. 3 people paid by the state to pin her down and take her clothes off, her top off, and inject her against her will as she screamed and fought in resistance to this process. And I knew I couldn't be a part of that. That wasn't going to help her. It wasn't going to help her at all. And the whole system wasn't helping them. Actually, the system was really complying with their problems a great deal. One of the biggest challenges we faced, I suppose, as mental health workers is institutionalization. It's the kind of dependency that situation and the drugs involved in that situation was breeding in the patients that we worked with. Many of the women there have been in institutions for over 20 or even 30 years, sometimes even longer. One of the women who lived there, who I suppose I became quite good friends with in a way, we played chess every day, quite a nice person really. She had been inside institutions since she was 16 years old, and she was in her late 30s when I met her. Her health was so bad, she was morbidly obese, and she would consume half a pint of antipsychotics and various other psychopharmaceuticals every day, and completely dependent on it. One of my colleagues said that on one occasion, as an experiment, they decided to just completely remove all of the medication and see what happened. And apparently this woman became a kind of animal, smearing her feces all over her room. She devolved into some non-human mentality. And when she entered the system, she wasn't like that. So clearly these drugs have made her completely dependent and robbed her of a normal existence, not that she necessarily would have had one. Sometimes patients would seem to get better, and then a day or two before release, they would do something to make sure that they were not released. So institutionalized, so afraid of the outside world after being in that cotton wool bubble of a mental hospital, doped up on various psychopharmaceuticals for decades. They couldn't escape anymore. A lot of the job simply involved preventing people from ending their lives. You know, you might be on a night shift and you have a clipboard there, and every 15 minutes you have to sign it and write the words "still breathing." And on one evening, the alarms were sounding and the other staff were restraining another patient, and one of the patients there used it as an opportunity to try and escape her life through suicide. She tied what we call a ligature around her neck, and I was blissfully unaware of all of this in the office, and because the alarm was going off for this other patient, the alarm for her incident was not really anything that could be comprehended. And another patient knocks on the door and just shouts, "Grab the ligature cutters," which are a kind of curved blade which is only sharp on the inside so that you can get in and cut the strangulation cord from around the person's neck. And so I did, and I ran to this patient who was turning blue, and I cut the cord off her neck, and I cut my thumb up pretty bad in the process. I think that scar did eventually just about heal, but it was a bit of a wound I inflicted on myself in the process. And that also just made me realise the futility of it all. You save their life, and then the next week they want to end it again, and you're constantly trying to prevent it, and they just want to leave their awful lives of intense suffering. And what good is it to force them to stay, actually? What good is it? What good was it doing? They weren't going to get better. They, again, had been in there for so long, they didn't really want to get better. But I think working in that place, I suppose, changed my view of society as a whole a little bit. Not that it was particularly positive going in there, but these hidden worlds are like the slurry valves of society. They're the places where people who don't fit in to this awful machine that we have made, that we call modern British society, get stored away, hidden away. They're the broken eggshells that get cast aside in making this wonderful omelette that we call modern Britain. Broken human beings who waste their lives in these places, suffering so much suffering going on there. It was, all in all, a little bit like that book, The Heart of Darkness. You peer behind a veil of illusion, and all that lies behind it is the horror, is absolute horror, hidden away so that normal people in Britain don't really know what the whole thing rests on.